Welcome to the third space.
Toward improving GDP or gross development product or economic outcomes for a country, or foundation-led initiatives or other initiatives to improve civic engagement, those would be the first and the second spaces. And those are, of course, critical and important, and we're not suggesting that we ignore the fact that we need to get jobs and we need to be informed citizens. Those are really important. But when we focus on education only for these kinds of utilitarian outcomes, we argue that we have forgotten that education also has a transformative dimension, that it's not just about creating an accomplished life for a young person, but also about helping them achieve a meaningful one. And so what we call the third space is this space which includes the first and second spaces of education reform, but also reminds teachers and parents and young people that the purpose of education is broader than just any given outcome for your individual life, but that it's also about how to have a more meaningful experience overall.
In other words, I tried to get my students to go from the body of the text to its soul.
That's really powerful. So what do you think is the most important takeaway you have at this point from your research journey so far?
We often talk about the lack of reading culture in the Muslim world. We also constantly hear about education being pegged as the solution to the various problems of the Muslim world.
And then even in more so-called, thriving societies, let's say, where, the economy is stronger in the United States or in Europe, you have astronomical rates of anxiety among young people. We have high levels of depression. We have what people call an empathy gap, growing polarization, young people who spend more time alone than than has previously been the case for other generations, fixed on their screens, interacting mostly through text, not knowing how to communicate. And so, what we are trying to do in Muslim societies, I actually think has tremendous relevance globally for young people. But we just haven't, I think it's a growing realization that we need to focus on these kind of areas of social emotional learning, but it's, we're playing catch up. After all these years of pushing kids to achieve, I think we as adults are kind of realizing, maybe we should have been, a little more attentive to what some people think of as softer kinds of skills, like, focusing on how we get along with other people, or how we communicate, or developing empathy. And so we're focusing on empathy, forgiveness, moral reasoning, community-mindedness, sense of belonging, and self-efficacy.
When we started looking at the third space and trying to translate it into an empirical research, you cannot just go with such a broad term. You have to translate it in a way that you can build constructs and measure them. Because these constructs should be measurable in order for you to survey people and have a quantitative study going on, which means that you're surveying as many people as possible to have some kind of common grounds for the mapping exercise. To do that, we went into the UNESCO concept of learning to be. And learning to be is all about taking into consideration the holistic approach to learning. So it's not just the academics and the education for employment, the first space, and it's not only education for civic education and for democracy, but it's also for this whole person. And that becomes critical because we know that there's lots of support for socio-emotional learning and its impact on academics. So in the research, we know that this works well and that this showed, evidence and promise in some international settings. I don't see why not in Muslim majority societies as well.
That's all that. Well, another question that some people might be wondering is, what's the big so what? So why are we doing this? What is our main purpose? Who are we keeping in mind when we're collecting this data?
Well, mapping the terrain, of course, is the first step between the first space and second space, which is performance on standardized testing and otherwise, but we also concentrate on the socio-emotional aspects of education, which we think will contribute to human development and would contribute to better societies, and accordingly would contribute to a better civilization worldwide.